They are crimes that happen in an instant. A moment of rage, a pulled trigger, a single terrible decision made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Those crimes are brutal, but they are comprehensible. They fit inside the framework of human passion and human failure that we have spent centuries learning to understand and punish. And then there are crimes that are planned, crimes that require patience, knowledge, the specific, deliberate application of intelligence in the service of destruction. Crimes where the perpetrator has sat quietly, perhaps for weeks, perhaps for months, and thought through every variable, every contingency, every possible line of investigation that might follow, and constructed their method to survive each one. Those crimes are rarer, and when they occur inside a relationship that was supposed to be built on love, inside a marriage that one of the two people involved did not even publicly acknowledge, they become something that the ordinary language of crime cannot quite contain. On the night of January 31st, 1891, a 19-year-old woman named Helen Potats lay in her dormitory bed at the Comstock School on West 40th Street in Manhattan and told her roommates about beautiful dreams. She had dreamed of him again, the medical student, the young man she had been seeing. The dreams were vivid and sweet, she said, the kind of dreams that leave warmth behind them when you wake. Her roommates had returned from a concert to find Helen in an unusually talkative mood despite the headache that had kept her home that evening. She had taken one of the capsules he had prescribed, just one, as instructed, and the headache had receded, and the dreams had come, and Helen Potats was happy. She would be dead before dawn. What happened in that dormitory room over the following hours would set in motion one of the most forensically complex, morally disturbing, and ultimately unresolvable criminal cases of the Gilded Age. A case that exposed the dark intersection of medical knowledge and intimate betrayal, that forced a city to confront questions about justice and evidence and the specific, particular vulnerability of young women in a world that valued their reputation more than their safety. A case that produced a conviction, an execution, and a tombstone inscription that has stood in a New York cemetery for more than a century reading words carved by a mother who never accepted the verdict. Murdered by 12 men. This is the story of Helen Potats, of Carlyle W. Harris, and of 6 capsules that may have been the most carefully constructed murder weapon of the 19th century, or may have been exactly what the surviving 2 were proven to be a modest headache remedy that killed a young woman no one fully understood. We are going to tell you everything, and at the end, you are going to have to decide for yourself. Helen Potats was 19 years old in January 1891. She was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, beautiful in the specific way that the Gilded Age found beautiful, dark-haired, refined, the product of a privileged New Jersey household that had given her education and social standing and the kind of careful moral instruction that was supposed to protect young women from the particular dangers the world had arranged for them. Her mother, Mrs. Potats, was a woman of firm convictions and fierce protectiveness. Helen was her daughter, and Helen was going to be properly married to a properly suitable man, and that was that. The properly suitable man would not turn out to be Carlyle Harris. Carlyle W. Harris was a medical student at Columbia, finishing his training, possessed of the specific confidence that young men in his position in 1889 tended to possess, educated, well-spoken, from a respectable family, understanding in ways that had more to do with calculation than care exactly how to present himself to the kind of family that the Potats family was. He was charming. He was articulate. He knew the right things to say in the right order. Helen met him in the summer of 1889 at the New Jersey resort town of Ocean Grove. She was 18. He was finishing his first year of medical school. A romance developed with the speed that romances develop when one party is experienced in accelerating them and the other is 19 and is being carefully sheltered from the machinery of male pursuit. When Harris approached Mrs. Potats about an engagement, she refused. Helen was too young, she said. The courtship would have to wait. Harris had a different timeline in mind. On February 7, 1890, Helen told her mother she was going with Carlyle and his brother to see the stock market in New York City. An educational excursion, perfectly chaperoned. Mrs. Potats gave her blessing. The brother never appeared. Instead, Helen and Carlyle went to City Hall where an alderman performed a marriage ceremony. They signed the register with false names Helen Nielsen and Charles Harris, close enough to their real names to remember, different enough to conceal. They returned to their separate lives. Helen went back to the Comstock School. Harris continued his medical studies. They told no one. It was, in Helen's mind, a real marriage. She believed herself to be Mrs. Carlyle Harris, even if the world did not know it yet. The false names should have been a warning. Within 6 weeks of the secret ceremony, Harris's visits became less frequent. Helen grew distressed. Mrs. Potats, who knew nothing of the marriage, was quietly pleased to see what appeared to be a natural cooling of the relationship. Then Helen discovered she was pregnant. What happened next tells you everything you need to know about the kind of man Carlyle Harris was. He did not suggest they make their marriage public. He did not offer to stand beside her. He performed an abortion on his wife himself, a procedure he executed so badly that it had to be corrected by second surgery performed by Helen's uncle, Dr. Treverton in Scranton, simply to save her life. The fetus was killed but not removed. Helen grew pale and weak and frightened, and Harris apparently found her distress inconvenient rather than heartbreaking. Testimony that emerged later at trial painted a pattern that extended well beyond Helen. Harris admitted to a friend, while drunk, that he had had multiple brides before her. His method was consistent: seduce young women with whiskey, or marry them under false names just to get them into bed, then abandon them once the conquest was complete. These other women, unnamed, unnumbered, lost to history, represent the full width of what Harris was. Helen Potats was not an accident of his character. She was an expression of it. By late 1890, Mrs. Potats had discovered the secret marriage. The response from Harris arrived in a letter that contained one of the most chilling phrases in the entire case. "All your wishes shall be complied with," he wrote, "provided no other way can be found." No other way. Mrs. Potats gave him an ultimatum: a proper public church wedding by February 7, 1891, exactly 1 year after the secret ceremony, or she would expose everything. Harris wrote back with that phrase hanging in the air like smoke. What other way could there be to avoid a marriage besides actually having one? 3 weeks before the deadline, Helen Potats took one of Carlyle's capsules and began to dream. The gaslight flickered in the Victorian dormitory as her breathing changed. Her words came slower. A numbness moved through her limbs that she seemed at first to find merely strange, perhaps even pleasant. Her roommates watched as the paralysis spread. As Helen struggled to move, to speak, to draw a breath, they summoned help immediately. 3 doctors arrived through the winter night and tried everything that medical science offered in 1891: whiskey to stimulate her heart, caffeine to wake her system, atropine to counteract potential poisons, digitalis for her failing pulse. They applied electric shock. They attempted artificial respiration. They fought for hours. Nothing worked. Before dawn, Helen Potats was dead. One of the attending doctors, a man named Fowler, examined her eyes in the gaslight. Her pupils were almost completely constricted pinpoints in the dim room. It was, he knew, a telltale sign. The sign of opiate poisoning. But the capsule box on her bedside table was signed by a medical student who had prescribed a modest, theoretically harmless dose. 1/6 of a grain of morphine combined with quinine. A dose that should have relieved pain, not caused death. Harris was summoned in the middle of the night. He arrived, saw Helen's body, and said something that Dr. Fowler never forgot. "My God, what can they do to me?" Not grief, not shock, not the words of a man confronting the death of a woman he loved. The immediate, reflexive calculation of a man thinking about consequences to himself. He was tested. The 2 remaining capsules in his possession were analyzed. They contained exactly what he claimed: 1/6 of a grain of morphine each. A dose that should have relieved pain, not caused death. The evidence of his innocence was literally in his pocket. If he had poisoned Helen, he had constructed what appeared to be a perfect crime. Mrs. Potats arrived from New Jersey and attempted to close the case before it became anything more. Helen had a heart condition, she insisted. The girl's heart had always been weak. There would be no autopsy. She had her daughter's body taken back to New Jersey for immediate burial, moving with the specific urgency of a woman trying to outrun a truth she already suspected. The New York authorities were not convinced. 55 days after Helen was laid to rest, they obtained a warrant and exhumed her coffin. The autopsy told a completely different story. Helen's heart was perfectly healthy. There had been nothing wrong with it at all. Her brain, however, showed clear signs of congestion, the classic presentation of opiate poisoning. Chemical analysis confirmed significant morphine in her system. But there was something else. Something that transformed the case from a suspicious death into what the prosecution would eventually call a near-perfect constructed murder. There was no quinine in Helen's body. None whatsoever. Harris had claimed to prescribe morphine and quinine together in each capsule. The quinine was a standard additive in many remedies of the period. Yet only morphine was found. Why would a medical student eliminate the quinine from a headache remedy? What possible medical purpose could that serve? The answer, prosecutors would eventually argue, was that the capsules were never meant to treat a headache at all. This is Grimveil Epoch, where forgotten stories resurface. Subscribe, and like the video, don't miss what rises next from the darkness. The theory that the prosecution constructed around the evidence was elegant in its horror. Harris had obtained 6 capsules from a pharmacy. He gave Helen only 4 of them. Of those 4, prosecutors believed one contained a massive dose of morphine, perhaps as much as 5 grains instead of 1/6. It did not matter which capsule contained the lethal dose. If Helen died on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd capsule, the remaining capsules in her possession would test normal. If she died on the 4th and final capsule, the 2 he had kept would still show the proper dose. The 2 remaining capsules in his pocket would always be clean. A kind of Russian roulette with pills, administered to a woman who trusted the man who gave them to her because she believed he was her husband. 10 days after Helen's death, Harris's medical school class studied the effects of morphine. A large bottle of morphine was shown to the students. Access was unsupervised. It would have been simple, investigators noted, for a medical student to obtain a significant quantity without notice. The sophistication of the method, combined with the access, combined with the motive, the approaching wedding deadline that would have forced him to publicly acknowledge a wife and a marriage he appears to have never intended to honor, built a circumstantial case that the prosecution believed was sufficient for conviction. But the coroner's office had bungled nearly every aspect of the initial investigation. The pillbox had been lost. There had been no immediate autopsy. The capsule analysis had been fumbled. Testimony transcripts had disappeared. The police had shown no interest in pursuing the case. Assistant District Attorney Vernon Davis reviewed the evidence and made a decision. He would not prosecute. The case was too compromised. Carlyle Harris, it seemed, would walk away free. And then a newspaper got involved. On March 21, 1891, the New York Evening World published what it called a world-startling article. Reporters had obtained affidavits from Mrs. Potats and Dr. Treverton. They laid out the secret marriage, the botched abortion, the suspicious death. The story caught fire. Public outrage forced the authorities to reopen the case. The media had done what the official channels had refused to do. The question this raised, one that the case has never fully resolved, was whether justice served by public pressure is still justice, or whether it is something else dressed in justice's clothing. The case of Carlyle Harris became, among other things, an early demonstration of the power of the press to determine which deaths receive the scrutiny they deserve. Without the world's intervention, Helen Potats might well have been buried twice, once in the New Jersey earth, and once in the official record as a tragic accident. Dr. Peabody, Dean of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, had already concluded that Harris was morally unfit to practice medicine regardless of legal guilt. The investigation was reopened. The evidence was assembled. On January 14, 1892, almost exactly 1 year after Helen's death, the trial began. The defense was headed by William F. Howe, a prominent attorney known for defending difficult cases. Harris himself handled much of his own examination, a decision that read either as remarkable confidence or remarkable arrogance, and possibly as both simultaneously. The defense strategy focused on a single possibility. Some people, they argued, were extraordinarily susceptible to morphine. Perhaps Helen was one of them. Perhaps she could die from a 1/6 of a grain, a dose that would merely relieve pain in most people. The prosecution's counter was elegant in its simplicity. Helen had already taken at least 1 previous capsule from the same prescription without incident. She had reported wonderful dreams, easy sleep. This proved she was not abnormally susceptible to morphine. If she had been, that first capsule would have shown some reaction. It had not. She had slept peacefully. Only the final capsule she took, whichever number it was in the sequence of 4, had killed her. The witnesses told the story piece by piece. Dr. Rudolph Whithorse testified about the chemical analysis. Dr. Fowler described finding Helen's constricted pupils and the desperate attempts to save her. Dr. Treverton spoke of the botched abortion. Testimony detailed the pattern of deception, the false names, the secret marriage, the multiple previous victims whose names no one had recorded. And then there was the missing quinine. On February 8, 1892, exactly 2 years to the day after Carlyle Harris secretly married Helen Potats under false names at City Hall, the jury returned a verdict. guilty of murder in the first degree. Harris was sentenced to death. Appeals were filed and denied. The date was set, May 8, 1893. Execution at Sing Sing prison. More than 1,000 people gathered on the hillside outside the prison that morning, waiting for the black flag that would signal the execution had been carried out. Capital punishment was still a public spectacle in ways that now seem almost impossible to reconcile with the society that practiced it. Harris issued a final statement before he was led to the electric chair. He admitted that his life had been immoral. He hoped to serve as a warning to other young men about the consequences of dissolute living. But then he added something else. I have no further motive for any concealment whatever. I desire to state that I die absolutely innocent of the crime of which I have been convicted. His mother, Frances McCready Harris, refused to accept the verdict. She placed a newspaper advertisement declaring that her son had been judicially murdered. She arranged for his tombstone to bear an inscription that remains there to this day. Murdered by 12 men. If the jury had only known. Known what, exactly? What evidence did she believe had been overlooked or suppressed? She never specified. She went to her grave believing her son innocent, insisting that justice had failed, maintaining a conviction so absolute that it survived every piece of evidence that contradicted it. Perhaps that is what some mothers do. Or perhaps she knew something. We will never know which it was. The case of Carlyle Harris demonstrates something about the Gilded Age that the gleaming surface of that era consistently tried to obscure. Medical knowledge could be weaponized with an efficiency that forensic science of the time was barely equipped to detect. The gap between what a sophisticated perpetrator could do with pharmaceutical access and what investigators could prove was enormous, and that gap was where Harris operated. The missing quinine told a story. The constricted pupils told a story. His first words upon seeing his wife's body told a story. The phrase "no other way" in his letter to Mrs. Potats told a story. But stories are not evidence. And the specific capsule that killed Helen Potats was never identified. The absolute proof of how it was prepared was never produced. The case against him was entirely circumstantial, constructed from the architecture of his behavior and the forensic signatures of his method, but never anchored to the direct observation of the act itself. The jury believed the circumstantial case was sufficient. 12 men weighed the evidence and concluded that Carlyle Harris had murdered his wife. They believed he had used his medical knowledge to construct a nearly perfect crime, foiled only by the telltale signs of opiate poisoning and the absence of quinine in a dead woman's body. His mother carved different words into his tombstone. Between those two positions lies the space that this case has occupied for more than a century. The space where certainty and doubt refuse to fully resolve into each other. The space where the evidence speaks clearly in the language of probability and refuses to speak at all in the language of absolute truth. Helen Potats was 19 years old when she died. She was described by those who knew her as beautiful, kind, gentle. She came from wealth and privilege, the kind that was supposed to protect her. She believed she was married to a man who had never intended the marriage to be real. She carried a child that was taken from her by the man who had made her pregnant. She wrote to her mother with cheerfulness she had to manufacture because she did not want to worry the woman who was trying to protect her. She took a capsule prescribed by a man she trusted and fell into dreams she described as beautiful. She did not know it was the last night of her life. She did not know, probably, how alone she actually was inside the marriage she believed in. She did not know that the man she had secretly married had a pattern of women behind him, unnamed and unrecorded, discarded once they had served whatever purpose he had assigned them. She did not know that the phrase "no other way" in his letter had a meaning her mother had not imagined when she read it. Or perhaps she knew some of it. Perhaps in the weeks before her death, watching him become more distant as the wedding deadline approached, something in her understood. Perhaps the dreams she described so warmly to her roommates were the last beautiful thing available to her in a situation that had become, without her fully realizing it, a trap with no comfortable exit. Mrs. Potats found herself caught between grief and scandal. She lied about her daughter's heart condition, tried to prevent an autopsy, attempted to bury the truth with Helen's body because Victorian shame culture demanded it. But eventually she cooperated with the investigation, knowing it would expose everything: the secret marriage, the abortion, the deception, the full catalogue of the ways her daughter had been used. The cost of justice was her family's reputation. She paid it. Miss Schofield, Helen's friend, was one of only 2 people Helen had trusted with the secret of her marriage. She watched as Helen grew desperate, trapped between a husband who would not acknowledge her and a mother who demanded propriety. caught in the narrow space between two forms of respectability that Victorian New York enforced with equal severity. After Helen's death, Miss Schofield testified. She added another piece to the mosaic. Another voice speaking for a young woman who could no longer speak for herself. The other brides, the unnamed ones, the ones Harris admitted to while drunk, the ones whose numbers nobody established and whose fates nobody recorded, remained the most haunting presence in the entire case. They had no names in the trial transcript. They had no graves with inscriptions. They had no mothers who cooperated with investigators at the cost of everything. They existed only as a pattern, a behavioral fingerprint that established what Carlyle Harris did with the women he targeted. Whatever happened to them, we do not know. They are lost to history in the particular way that the victims of charming predators in respectable society are lost to history quietly, without official notice, absorbed back into lives that continued to function around an injury that had no public name. Helen Potats had a name. She had a grave. She had a mother who eventually chose truth over propriety and paid the social price of that choice. She had a case that went to trial, a jury that deliberated, a verdict that was rendered. The others were not so fortunate. This is Grimveil Epoch, where forgotten stories resurface. Subscribe, and like the video. Don't miss what rises next from the darkness. More than a century later, we can lay out what was known and what remains uncertain with the clarity that time and distance sometimes allow. The evidence suggesting guilt was substantial. No quinine was found in Helen's body despite Harris's claim that he had prescribed it. Morphine was present in quantities inconsistent with the dose he claimed to have provided. His first response upon seeing his dead wife was to ask what they could do to him. His pattern of behavior, multiple secret marriages, casual seductions, deliberate abandonment, was established through witness testimony. The botched abortion demonstrated a specific callousness toward Helen's welfare that sat entirely consistently with the prosecution's portrait of his character. His letter to Mrs. Potats contained a phrase that could be read as a veiled threat. He had unsupervised access to morphine through his medical school. The sophisticated structure of the capsule distribution for given, two kept, ensuring the retained ones would always test clean, suggested the kind of premeditation that does not emerge spontaneously. The case against him was also entirely circumstantial. The remaining capsules tested normal. There was no direct proof that he had tampered with any specific capsule. No one witnessed the preparation. His denials were consistent even at the moment of death, when most people's capacity for performance collapses under the weight of what is about to happen to them. The investigation had been handled so badly at the outset that reasonable doubt existed in the gap between what the evidence showed and what the evidence could prove. And his mother, who knew him better than any jury, believed in his innocence until the day she died. The jury in 1892 weighed all of this and convicted him. 12 men concluded that the pattern, the motive, the missing quinine, the fatal morphine, and the character of the man who had married a woman in secret and expressed his first concern for himself upon finding her dead, all of it, taken together, constituted guilt beyond reasonable doubt. His mother had a different answer carved into stone. Between those two positions lies a question that this case will never resolve. Was Carlyle Harris a calculating killer who maintained his lie with such discipline that he carried it to the electric chair, performing innocence even in the final seconds of his life? Or was he an innocent man whose genuine moral failures, the secret marriage, the botched abortion, the pattern of predatory behavior, the cold response upon seeing Helen's body, created a circumstantial case so compelling that 12 men convicted him of a crime he did not commit? The evidence speaks. It speaks in the language of probability rather than certainty, in the language of pattern and inference rather than direct observation. Helen Potats was 19 years old. She lay in a gaslit dormitory room in Manhattan on the last night of January 1891, describing beautiful dreams to her roommates, her breathing growing labored as the words came slower, the numbness moving through her limbs while 3 doctors fought through the dark hours with every tool that 1891 medicine could offer. Nothing worked. The 6 capsules remain a mystery. We know one of them killed Helen Potats. We are reasonably certain who prepared them. We know the quinine that should have been in them was not in her body. We know that his first words were not of grief but of self-preservation. The absolute truth died in an electric chair at Sing Sing prison on May 8, 1893. Or perhaps it died earlier. Perhaps it died in a dormitory room on a winter night in Manhattan, while a 19-year-old woman dreamed beautiful dreams and breathed her last breath, never understanding what had been given to her, never knowing that the man she had trusted with her life had given her something that her body recognized as poison long before her mind could form the thought. She dreamed until she could not breathe, and the question of who was truly responsible has never been answered with the certainty that she deserved. Not officially, not definitively, not in any way that gives the full weight of truth to a young woman who trusted the wrong person, in the wrong city, in an era that had arranged the world to make that trust almost impossible to survive. Helen Potats rests in a cemetery in New Jersey. Carlyle Harris is buried in New York, beneath a stone his mother paid for, bearing words she chose. Murdered by 12 men. If the jury had only known. She never told us what they should have known. And the space where that answer should be remains open, a century and more later, as open as the night her roommates watched her breathing change and called for help that arrived too late. Some questions do not close. They simply become part of what we carry forward. The weight of what cannot be proven, the shape of what was probably true, the face of a 19-year-old woman who told her roommates about beautiful dreams and did not live to see the morning. That is the story of the 6 capsules. That is the story of Helen Potats.